hospital discharge papers felt heavy, but the silence in the car on the way over felt heavier. Nothing, though, was heavier than the words my son spoke as he stood by the nurse's station. Not even looking at me. "We can't take you home today. We have plans." Just like that, they turned and left me there a week after a major hip replacement with nothing but a flimsy hospital gown and a shattered heart. They thought they were leaving their burden behind. They had no idea that by that evening they'd be back, begging for a secret I was no longer willing to share. My name is Eleanor, and for all of my 65 years, I've tried to be a good person, a good neighbor, a good wife to my dear husband before he passed, and above all, a good mother. I was a librarian for 40 years. My days were filled with the quiet rustle of pages and the simple joy of helping a child find a story that lit up their eyes. It wasn't a glamorous life, but it was a good one, built on small kindnesses and a deep love for my family. My whole world was my son, Daniel. From the day he was born, he was the sun in my sky. I poured every bit of myself into him. My husband and I were rich, not by a long shot, but we made sure Daniel never wanted for anything that truly mattered. We saved for his college education before we even thought about our own retirement. I took on extra shifts on weekends just to pay for his soccer camps and school trips. When my husband died from a sudden heart attack 10 years ago, Daniel, who was in his early 20s, became the absolute center of my universe. My love for him was fierce and protective, the only constant in a world that had suddenly gone sideways. Then, about 5 years ago, he met Sarah. At first, I was so happy for him. She was poised, ambitious, and had a smile that could charm anyone. I saw the way Daniel looked at her, and my heart just swelled. I wanted my son to be happy, to build a life with someone he adored. I welcomed her with open arms and treated her like the daughter I never had. I even gave them a big chunk of my savings for the down payment on their first house gift, out of love. I never for a second thought of it as a loan. But slowly, things started to change. Daniel, who'd always been so thoughtful, became distant. Our weekly Sunday dinners turned into monthly ones, then dwindled to just holiday obligations. When they did visit, the conversation always seemed to find its way back to money. Sarah would casually mention some luxury vacation they couldn't quite afford or a new car she had her eye on. A few days later, Daniel would call me, asking for a short-term loan, a phrase that had long lost its meaning. The money never came back, and I never had the heart to push him on it. I just told myself this is what parents do. You give, and you don't keep score. Sarah's influence was subtle, but it was everywhere. She'd make little comments about my house, calling it quaint in a tone that really meant old and tired. She laughed at my frugal habits, the very same habits that had allowed me to help them so much. Daniel, once so down to earth, started adopting her expensive tastes, becoming someone I barely recognized. He began to see me not as his mother, but as a safety net, an endless bank account for a lifestyle they couldn't afford on their own. I felt this quiet sadness creeping in, but I pushed it down, blaming myself. Maybe I was just being an old-fashioned, overbearing mother. Their happiness was all that mattered, right? The diagnosis of severe osteoarthritis in my hip was a shock. My doctor was blunt. A full hip replacement was the only way I'd avoid being in a wheelchair. The pain had become a constant, grinding part of my life, but the thought of surgery terrified me. The idea of recovering from something so major all by myself was daunting. I called Daniel, my voice shaking, and he was instantly reassuring. "Don't worry, Mom," he said, his voice full of the warmth I'd been missing. "Sarah and I will be there for you. We'll take you to the hospital. We'll bring you home. We'll get your house all set up. You won't have to worry about a thing." The relief that washed over me was so strong it brought tears to my eyes. Of course, he'd be there. He was my son. The week in the hospital was a blur of pain, pills, and physical therapy. It was sterile and lonely, and it was made even lonelier by the fact that Daniel and Sarah only visited once. It was a quick 10-minute stop on their way to a dinner party. They brought a cheap magazine and complained about the hospital parking. Still, I held on to his promise. They would be there to take me home. On the day of my discharge, I was a bundle of nerves and excitement. A kind nurse named Maria helped me into the wheelchair, my small bag on my lap. The doctor was very clear. I couldn't put any weight on my leg for weeks and would need a lot of help at home, with everything from cooking to just getting around. I waited by the nurse's station, my eyes glued to the entrance, looking for my son's face. They showed up nearly an hour late. Daniel looked annoyed and kept checking his watch, while Sarah was just tapping away on her phone, looking bored. There was no warm smile. No "how are you feeling, Mom? Are you ready to go?" Daniel asked, his tone clipped. "Yes, darling. The nurse just has a few instructions for you," I said, my voice weak but happy. Maria, the nurse, started to explain my medication schedule and the care I would need. She stressed how important it was for someone to stay with me for at least the first few days. Sarah let out a loud sigh, a sound of pure irritation. That's when Daniel cut the nurse off. He walked right up to the counter, avoiding my gaze. "Look, we can't take you home today," he said, his words sharp and cold. I just stared at him, my brain unable to make sense of what he was saying. What do you mean?" "You promised." "We have plans, Mom," Sarah chimed in, finally looking up from her phone with a dismissive glare. "We have non-refundable reservations. It's a very important weekend for us." I felt the blood drain from my face. "Reservations? More important than your mother coming home from surgery?" My voice was just a whisper. The whole thing felt like a cruel joke. "Don't be so dramatic," Daniel snapped, his face hardening. "The nurse can call you a taxi or something. We have to go." And just like that, they left. They didn't even look back. They left me in that wheelchair under the harsh fluorescent lights, surrounded by the smell of antiseptic and the pitying looks of strangers. The feeling of abandonment was absolute. It was a cold, sharp pain that cut right through the fog of my medication, and it hurt more than my hip ever could. I felt my heart, which I guarded so carefully since my husband's death, just shatter. Before I tell you what happened next, and how that single moment of betrayal led to the most shocking evening of my life, I have to ask, have you ever been deeply let down by the one person you thought you could always count on? Let me know your story in the comments. And if you believe in the power of choosing yourself, please take a moment to like and subscribe for more stories. The silence they left behind was deafening. I just sat there, frozen, the papers trembling in my hand. Maria, the nurse, knelt beside me and gently put her hand on my arm. "I am so sorry," she whispered, her eyes full of the compassion I desperately needed. Her kindness was a small lifeboat in the middle of my despair. She told me not to worry, that she'd handle everything. She got the hospital social worker, who arranged for a medical transport to take me home. That ride home was the loneliest journey in my entire life. Every bump in the road sent a jolt of pain through my hip, but it was nothing compared to the ache in my soul. As I stared out the window, I replayed that scene at the hospital over and over. Their coldness, their selfishness, it wasn't a what-I'm thing. It was the final, brutal chapter in a story that had been writing itself for years. My mind started drifting back to all the little slights I had chosen to ignore. The birthdays they forgot, only to call a week later asking for money. The Mother's Day brunch Sarah insisted on hosting, where she handed me a bill for my share at the end. The time they borrowed my late husband's vintage watch, something I treasured, only for me to find it for sale online a month later. They claimed they'd been robbed, a lie so shameless it took my breath away. Each memory was a small cut, and now I felt like I was bleeding out. I had made so many excuses for them, telling myself they were young and finding their way. But they weren't young anymore. They were adults who looked at me not with love, but with calculation. I wasn't their mother. I was a convenience, an ATM to be used until it was empty. When the transport pulled up to my quiet, empty house, the driver helped me inside. The silence was immense. This was the home where I had raised my son, where the walls used to echo with his laughter. Now, that same silence just mocked me. I looked at the photos on the mantelpiece, Daniel with a gap-toothed grin, Daniel at his graduation, Daniel on his wedding day, smiling next to me. A single, bitter tear rolled down my cheek, and in that deafening silence, something inside me shifted. The raw pain began to cool and harden into something new, clarity. A cold, hard, liberating clarity. I had spent years making myself smaller to make them comfortable, giving away my own security for their fleeting happiness. The woman they left at the hospital was a heartbroken mother, but the woman sitting in this silent house was someone new. She was done being a doormat. Slowly, painfully, I reached for my phone, but I didn't call a friend to cry. I called my lawyer. Evening fell, painting long shadows across the room. I'd spent the afternoon on the phone, my voice steady and firm as I set things in motion with my lawyer. Afterwards, I ordered groceries online and arranged for a home care aide to start the next morning. For the first time in years, I was putting myself first, and a strange sense of peace settled over me. Just as I was drifting into a light doze, a frantic pounding on my front door startled me awake. My heart hammered against my ribs. I wasn't expecting anyone. The pounding grew more insistent. "Mom, Mom, open the door. It's us." It was Daniel's voice, but it was laced with a panic I'd never heard before. I slowly used my walker to get to the door. As soon as I unlocked it, they burst in. They did not look like a couple coming back from a relaxing weekend. Daniel's hair was a mess, his face pale. Sarah's eyes were wide and frantic, her usual cool composure totally gone. "Thank God," Daniel breathed out, not even asking how I was. "Mom, we need your help. We need you to sign something. It's an emergency." Sarah rushed forward, holding out a stack of papers and a pen. "We're so sorry about today, Eleanor," she said, her voice a high-pitched, syrupy mess that made my skin crawl. "Things just got so complicated. We can explain, but we really need you to sign these. First, it's just a formality. I didn't take the papers. I just looked at them. A formality for what?" Daniel started pacing. "We're buying a new house, Mom. A beautiful place. But the loan is, well, it's big. The bank got nervous at the last minute. They need more collateral. They need proof of future assets." I stared at him, the final piece of the puzzle clicking into place. Future assets? You mean my assets, my house, my savings? Sarah nodded eagerly, a desperate look in her eye. "Exactly. It's just a letter for the bank, confirming you've named Daniel as your beneficiary. It lets them factor in your estate for our loan. Once you sign, we get our dream house." So that was it. The important, non-refundable plans weren't a vacation. It was a meeting with a loan officer. They didn't just leave me at the hospital out of carelessness. They had left me because they were busy leveraging my entire life-vest work and my eventual death for a bigger mortgage. The sheer greed of it was stunning. A slow, cold smile crept across my face. I gestured toward the papers. I'm afraid I can't sign those. Daniel stopped pacing. What? Mom, don't be difficult. It's just a signature. No, Daniel, it's more than that, I said, my voice quiet but strong as steel. You see, I had a lot of time to think today after you left me. I realized that family isn't a business transaction. Love isn't something you withdraw from a bank. It's about showing up. It's about caring for people when they're at their most vulnerable. That's a lesson neither of you seems to have learned. I took a breath. So I made some non-refundable plans of my own this afternoon. I spoke with my lawyer. As of this morning, Daniel, you are no longer the beneficiary of my will. The color drained from their faces. I've instructed my lawyer to create the Eleanor Vance Trust. For patient support, I continued, savoring the quiet power of the moment. When I pass, this house will be sold, my entire estate, including all the money you were so interested in, will go into the trust. Its only purpose will be to provide support transportation, home care, and comfort for elderly patients who are discharged from the hospital with no one to care for them, for people like me. The silence that followed was the heaviest I'd ever known. Daniel just stared, his mouth opening and closing like a fish out of water. Sarah's face twisted from disbelief into pure, ugly rage. You can't do that, she shrieked. That's our money. That's Daniel's inheritance. You're ruining our lives. No, Sarah, I replied calmly. You are not entitled to my life's work. The only inheritance I owed my son was love and respect, and he forfeited his claim to that today. You didn't just leave me in a hospital. You showed me exactly what I'm worth to you. So I've decided to invest in people who actually need it, instead of people who just want it. Daniel finally found his voice, a pathetic whine. Mom, please, don't do this. We made a terrible mistake. We're sorry, but the apology was hollow, born of desperation, not regret. I saw no remorse for the pain they caused me, only for the prize they had just lost. I pointed to the door. I believe your important weekend is over. Please leave your key on the table on your way out. They stood there for another minute, sputtering, threatening, and finally begging. But it was like watching a play from a great distance. Their words had no power over me anymore. Defeated, they finally left, slamming the door so hard it rattled the photos on the wall. In the months that followed, I healed both my body and my spirit. My home care aide, a wonderful woman named Chloe, became a true friend. As my hip grew stronger, so did my resolve. I started volunteering at the hospital, sitting with patients who, like me, had found themselves alone. I shared stories, held hands, and offered the comfort I had been denied. It turned out that giving of myself, on my own terms, was more fulfilling than anything I had ever given my son. I still get desperate texts from Daniel sometimes, full of guilt trips and empty apologies. I ignore them. My peace is too precious. They didn't just lose an inheritance that day. They lost a mother. And I didn't lose a son. I lost a burden I had carried for far too long. In losing it, I found myself, and I learned the most valuable lesson of all. Sometimes, the greatest act of love isn't holding on tighter, but finally letting go and choosing to save yourself.